Hey aspirants, welcome to today's episode of I Can. Hope you all are doing good and following the newspapers regularly so that your answers stand out from others, and it definitely makes sure you are into the final list with good advantage in your mains answer writing. So we'll start today's topic with a good quote, or let's say it is a kind of phrase that can be used to in your answers for creating a perception of how a common person who has a major significant role is not acknowledged well, and they can really make a lot of difference if they are acknowledged. So for these instances you can use the quotes like pawn to queen, that is in the game of chess, from a mere pawn who acts as a soldier to defend and to protect the king and the queen, rising from there, getting promoted to the range of a queen, is something that we are talking about today. So remember this phrase to use in your answers. So here, I think we have already discussed in one of our previous episodes on what is the role of ASHA workers and how their identity needs to be getting a center stage, keeping in mind the various reforms we are doing in the health sector. So today also we are looking into the same topic, but with a new perception based on the article that had come up in Indian Express. So the title here, Pawn to Queen, a call to empower ASHA workers. So we'll first discuss about what is the statistics that we need to remember related to ASHA workers. So they are not just popular in India. After COVID, you know the role of ASHA workers and how they were celebrated across the country. ASHA workers are almost the most celebrated community health workers, and also the scheme related to this is popular world over. So if you see, it was initiated in the year 2005, and as of now there are approximately 1 million ASHA workers who are helping India to deepen its health infrastructure. So they are almost called as a backbone of our public health infrastructure, especially they have a major role in rural areas. So, where are they contributing to? Majorly, it is maternal and child health. So, because of ASHA health workers, we are able to create awareness related to the concept of family planning to reduce the size of the family and healthy child care. At the same time, we are also talking about vaccine drive. So, these are the areas where ASHA workers have significantly contributed. So as of now, there was an idea that ASHA workers need to be recognized as government servants. Their pay needs to be regularized. So that idea we had discussed in the past. So here we consider ASHA worker, according to the article, as an activist. So activists are those people who have a drive or a passion to fulfill a particular work given to them. So ASHA workers are actually called as activists in many formal contexts. So what is the idea here? They're promoting health, they're creating awareness, mobilizing local community, especially for the purpose of public health planning. So when we are calling ASHA workers as activists, we need to focus on behavioral change of ASHA workers, or there's a lot of change which needs to work on behavioral aspect so that we get the best out of this. So author here is preferring 3P strategy. That is, first, there is a need for persuasion, which is a topic relevant to paper 4. Then we have perseverance, that needs to be worked in ASHA workers case. And the third one is proactive approach. So you can fit this to many of the requirements where local work or local support system is required to mobilize a particular scheme. So what is the current condition of ASHA workers? If you see that ASHA workers are, the situation is that they are socially and economically marginalized communities. Because of the less payment or any kind of extra work they're doing, they are coming from social and economically marginalized communities. And what is the work that ASHA workers are expected to do? Probably to track the number of pregnancies that are there. In case of high risk pregnancies, referring them to hospitals, counseling people about the nutrition security that a mother and a child needs to take. So all this work is based on a kind of work, that is, let's say it is a record that they have to keep, that today we have done all these activities, or let's say there is a kind of list given by government to them, and ASHA workers just have to tell, I have completed this work, check boxing, or it is basically called checkbox approach. So all the boxes are checked, then an ASHA worker would be telling that the work is completed. So what this author is talking about is, basically we are talking, or we are compelling ASHA workers to be compliant to a particular regulation or guidelines that the government has given, rather than we are focusing on what is the outcome of the work ASHA workers are doing. So this is nothing but undermining their capacity. Let's say if an ASHA worker could do much better than this, as we are given them a checkbox and telling that only this much you have to complete, maybe we are trying to undermine the capacity that they have, in which they could really make transformative changes, but ultimately converting them into pawns of the government. So instead of this, the narrative is telling that they need to be made the queen of local health governance. So instead of, there is a popular idea that financial incentive would encourage the ASHA workers to go the extra mile. So there is no doubt financial motivation or monetary benefits will act as an incentive, but doesn't encourage them to take up the extra mile. For example, let's say serving or giving the last mile delivery to the public in rural areas especially needs a sustained approach. So this sustained approach is done by ASHA workers only when many of them are committed to the work, and not because of the monetary amount or monetary benefits they are getting. So if you see the sustained work and the dedication that ASHA workers show, how to measure it in money is the biggest question. So that is the reason why monetizing this extra efforts done by ASHA workers is not a possibility. And if we tell that financial inclusion or giving money to this extra mile effort, it would not really make a difference and make the process more complicated. So what is the solution for this? According to this author, solution lies in many psychological theories, so which is focusing on self-directed action. So remember these two psychologists here, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. So their narrative, or their explanation of a concept here for self-directed action would be a template for us to use in many answers. So self-directed action, it basically depends on how people experience various choices given to them. So it is rooted in the satisfaction of basically 3 psychological needs. So we'll make a particular choice if the 3 psychological needs are fulfilled. So first one is autonomy. The second one being competence. And the third one being relatedness. So if we apply this to the case of ASHA workers, autonomy is their ownership over work, which currently is absent because most of them are dictated by the local governments. Competence is about feeling capable to accomplish certain tasks. So this capability is not measured many a times and not appreciated, thus demotivating the ASHA workers. Relatedness is about the need to feel connected to others, especially through one's own work, or getting a recognition for their work, or trying to use their mechanism to influence the other ASHA workers in the other areas. So these kind of networks will make people feel a relatedness with the work they are doing, and ultimately push to self-directed action. So ACR, basically we can quote it as ACR. It is crucial for intrinsic motivation, which is coming from within. So here, again, the social isolation that ASHA workers are suffering from, and they lack recognition. All these are challenges that the ASHA workers are facing. So because they have been persistently facing a challenge like disconnection. So this is a very important input, where ASHA workers are disconnected from the same community which they protect, because they have little extra knowledge about protecting the health outside the community. At the same time, the formal health infrastructure also considered ASHA workers as outsiders, as they are not sufficiently trained to take care of certain health emergencies. So they are disconnected from the world and also from the healthcare system, which is less motivating when they have to take up the extra mile work. So what would be the positive beneficiary, or what could be the positive interventions here is to motivate them and to identify and recognize their hard work. So here there is a very good initiative taken by governments of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, where they have mutual support and contact networks between ASHA workers, where they feel that our burdens and our ideas can be shared with each other. The common platform facilitated by the government has played a major role here. At the same time, we can also have a direct feedback mechanism from the beneficiary. So these beneficiaries telling ASHA workers how they have positively helped their life, that would definitely go a long way in keeping the ASHA workers motivated, and yes, converting them into the queen that they deserve to be. Okay, so we have a question here, a practice question, empowering the ASHA workers to truly integrate the multiple roles of community mobilizer, activist, provider of first contact care will ensure holistic development outcomes at the grassroots level. Discuss. So this was one of the secure questions that had come up in Insights website itself. So do keep visiting the website for secure initiative, wherein you can find questions based on the current affairs, and model answers also will be posted so that your thought process is integrated in the answer format. So coming to the next topic, the reforms we need to achieve 2047 goal, that is making India a developed country by 2047. This was an article written by the chairman of Confederation of Indian Industries, who have suggested certain reforms and initiatives across multiple sectors of the Indian economy if the country has to grow by 2047. So this topic would be very relevant for us in GS paper 3 when we want to talk about economic growth in India, or how to sustain economic growth, or how to make India a developed country. In all these parameters, this topic would be relevant. So we'll see certain issues here. The 5 suggestions that the person is giving here would be very important. So the first one we are talking about is next generation reforms. That is, we need to bring new reforms to the fore to make sure India achieves sustained growth. So there is a backdrop that the author has given here, telling that if India has to become a developed country by 2047, every year there needs to be a growth rate of 8%. And how they are telling this is based on the idea of developed countries like China, South Korea, who have persistently grown for 8% for around 25 years in a row. So India, if you take for the past 25 years, from 2001 to let's say 2023, our growth rate has consistently been 6.7%, with COVID years being an exception. So if we want to achieve this 8% growth rate for coming years in a sustainable way, following reforms would be necessary. So what are the next generation reforms? We'll just check it in the later. So all these next generation reforms need to be steered either by the concurrent list or state list. That is, they're basically talking about decentralization of many of the economical ideas. So consensus building would be possible if this is achieved. And the author here gives us the example of GST Council, which is an apt definition to make sure how economic decisions can be done in a federal manner. So they're suggesting that to take forward the 4 factors of production, that is land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship, we need some organization like a GST Council, which will take the work of India's production story further. So all this needs to be focused on state or concurrent list with not much intervention at the central level. So what would this help in? This would help in increasing productivity and market efficiency at the same time. So the second suggestion told by the author here is related to public capital. Public capital here, they are talking about unlocking the public capital, which is nothing but the public sector enterprises which are having huge amount of capital invested by the government. At the same time, there are certain brownfield projects of the public or the government side which can or which have the potential to be disinvested. So why disinvested? Because many of them are not performing to their full potential, because of which disinvestment is a good option. So what will this lead to? It will lead to resource allocation, or let's say increasing the resources of the government. But the biggest question we face during disinvestment is when to disinvest and which company to disinvest. So for questions like this, the author suggests that we can have a committee. So this committee would be headed by certain private players plus certain retired government or officers who together can check which particular MNC or which particular PSC needs disinvestment, what percentage, when it can be done. It can be chalked out by public-private partnership here. So this is the second suggestion given. The third one would be important with respect to sovereign wealth funds. So sovereign wealth fund is a concept where countries would try to diversify their economic options so that their economy is not based on a single means of income. Let's say for countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, their main revenue comes from fuel. But due to the climate change and all these patterns, fuel or let's say fossil fuels may face a threat, and if they are phased down completely, these countries would not have a positive revenue. Hence, these countries have already diversified their funds in the form of acquiring overseas strategic assets like, let's say, port or critical minerals like lithium and all of them. So they have already invested in them so that in future when fossil fuel market takes a toll, their economy still continues. So the author is suggesting for a similar way for Indian government as well, so that we invest in all this external assets. So from where will we get the money? The money that we got by disinvesting the PSCs, from there that money can be utilized for creating sovereign wealth fund. So the fourth major aspect discussed by the author here was related to irrigation. So why irrigation? Because in India, monsoons are erratic, and due to climate change, we are seeing that cyclone and all this are becoming very intensive, directly putting a toll on agriculture. And people's let's say dependency on monsoon has led to a lot of rural demand having a fluctuation, directly impacting the food inflation and thus having a major negative role on the overall growth of the country. So if governments invest in irrigation and tries to make sure 80% of the gross cropped area comes under the irrigation, most of the uncertainties associated with agriculture would be gone, and it would make India's agriculture climate resilient to a great extent. So if we do that, we are doing nothing but strengthening the rural demand, which will be the crux for India's whole growth story. So this was an important point. And the fifth one is to tell about continuing the concept of ease of doing business. So let me know, I think we have discussed in one of the previous classes about a state government which has created an innovative solution to increase the investment from foreign companies, which is a kind of upgradation of ease of doing business. Let us know in the comment section if you recall this particular scheme. So this needs to be continued, and basically what should be the focus? The focus should be rationalization, simplification and digitalization of all compliances and approval that the government gives for private sector. So with this, the whole concept of growth story from the industrial perspective you can talk about in essays, and also in your article GS paper 3 questions, as in how economy needs to prosper in the coming days. So the next one is related to an incident where one of the judges of the High Court was found to be making politically biased statements in a private ceremony, which grabbed a lot of headlines, talking a lot about code of conduct for judges, or let's say ethics that the judges need to follow. So this could be a very probable question not only in our GS paper 2 judiciary but also in GS paper 4, that is morality of public officers. So basically, judicial ethics is a concept which arises from the idea that from where the judiciary gets its power, or why judiciary is considered to be powerful. The first point here is public acceptance. That is, if public believes that judiciary is authentic and judiciary is something I can trust on, that is where the courts get the power from. And the second one is integrity of the judiciary. So integrity is about living to one's own words. So basically, when we are talking about judicial ethics, the role of judges is very important here. And we have a particular code that India's Supreme Court had accepted in 1997. So in any answer for you related to the code of ethics of judges, do mention this restatement of values of judicial life in 1997. So according to this, judges must reassure that the faith of the public is always staying with the judiciary, or when public believes that judiciary is impartial, the role of the judges is to make sure that they keep giving strong strength to the idea of judiciary's impartiality. At the same time, when we talk about impartiality in the first point, the second is about public gaze. That is, all the time the judges should be having a consciousness that though they may be out on their private or personal work, they're always in the public gaze. So it would kind of be difficult to separate their official life from their personal life. So because of this, if you are aware, this principle is true for bureaucrats as well. Even when they're in their non-official times, the public gaze would always be on them. And being conscious about this, the judge's conduct needs to be molded. So this is one of the principles that was violated in the recent incident. And the second important one is Bangalore Principles. So Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct, this was adopted in 2002, which basically talks about impartiality of the judges, where they don't discriminate between any political party or any of the individuals. Then next comes independence of judiciary, where they're not bowed down by executive or legislative wing. Integrity is remaining true to one's own values and judgments. Equality is, as we know, treating all the citizens with equal capacity. So these principles are part of Bengaluru Principles of Judicial Conduct 2002. So in addition to this, let us look at some international examples which have made sure judges are true to their position. That is, first one is about the United Kingdom, where there is a concept called Judicial Appointments Commission. This commission is an independent body. This independent body appoints the judges, thus stopping the judges, or let's say the judges are completely avoiding the politicization of judiciary. So this would be a better example and a good practice that India can emulate. The second one is ethical training and continuous education. So this would be very relevant for India and other parts, other judiciaries as well. So ethical training and continuous education. So this is a practice that is done in Canada. So where especially judges face ethical dilemmas and various case laws when they are referring to. So what is the concept here is, even when the judges are serving their whole period of service, regularly they'll be trained as in how to answer these ethical dilemmas, how to take care of certain case laws, and basically it is to keep them updated to the tune of the time that this particular effort has been done in Canada. So that would go a long way definitely in helping the idea of making judiciary impartial. So as we know, the new justice symbol was in news for a month ago. So it is about removing the blindfold of the lady justice, giving her a constitution and changing the robe to an Indian attire. So basically we are talking about Indianization of justice. And here this symbol goes to a great way as in how judiciary has tried to reinvent itself out of all the dogmas that was bogging it, which also includes something that we called as black coat syndrome. Black coat syndrome is the pendency of cases with judiciary, which is another pressing concern with respect to the judiciary that we are talking about. So mere symbolism or changing of these images just may not be relevant when we talk about reinventing judiciary. It is also the efforts at the ground level to make the judges accountable, ethical and moral in their behavior, to reassure the public that they need to be trusted. So the next topic is a very interesting case study from Africa. So you can see here the image of a cat. So cat, if you know, is one of the most trending words in social media. So when Instagram was not that popular and YouTube was the popular social media, people were tirelessly watching funny cat videos for entertainment basically. So there is a group in Africa called Institute for Communities and Wildlife in Africa. They identified that this love or affection for a domestic cat can be utilized for conservation of their wild relatives. So it really has worked out, and let's see what is the story about it. Okay, so if you see the global cat views or number of views this cat has got, it is so huge that it is becoming one of the trending words for quite some time. So utilizing this love for cat, the Institute for it is called IC Wild. This institute has initiated a Facebook page. Okay, it's a Facebook page for conservation of caracals. So caracals are basically wild cats who usually are in the urban areas. But in case of the Cape Town in South Africa, these caracals have accustomed to semi-urban habitats in the outskirts of villages. So they are becoming victims of accidents, frequent human caracal conflicts, and at times they are becoming victims of rat poison that are thrown to kill rats, and by mistake caracals would consume and it would lead to their death. So what this idea was that this love for cat, can we not showcase it by creating a fan page for caracals in Facebook and giving a message that if this cat is cute, caracal is also equally deserving of the affection of the public. And to our surprise, it did work well to a great extent. Within a short span of time, in Facebook, it had 16,900 followers altogether. And even in Instagram, it has got a good following, thus getting a tag of micro influencer. So basically what happened is when they posted news of some good images of this caracal, people were telling gorgeous, people were telling cute, they were telling adorable. So this showed that they would conserve this animal. So after this, any instances of caracal and man conflict were reported to this organization, telling that this poor animal has got hit by a vehicle and it needs conservation. So till this was popularized, the idea of caracal and it gaining empathy of the public was not real, or it was not possible. And when this image was posted, public would tell that it is really sad that the animal got hit by a vehicle. So this whole initiative was successful in evoking strong emotional response from the follower. So the idea here is to give continuous science communication through social media so that these animals can be conserved to a great extent. So very recently, we saw that in social media, this pygmy hippo, okay, it is basically belonging to the African continent, called Moo Deng. This pygmy hippo baby was named Moo Deng. It became a viral video or viral content for many people online, as its videos were made by the zoo where it is maintained. So it started drawing so much attention that Thailand zoos had to hire the law enforcement officers to keep the crowd away. So this idea is telling us that utilizing the concept of this case study from caracals, this we can say the pygmy hippo, which is threatened by mining and other activities in Africa, it can be conserved by using this Moo Deng as the face of conservation of pygmy hippos. So do remember, these kind of animals and these initiatives are very, very useful when we talk about India becoming a victim of man-animal conflict every now and then. And it is having a huge toll on human life and also on the economy of the country. So do give suggestions like this to sensitize the idea of these animals to the public, so that the public and the government efforts to reduce this kind of clashes would continue. So the last topic of the day is a very interesting practice from Cameroon. So Cameroon was there in Hindu and other popular newspapers across the world. So Cameroon Island is having a tribe called Bauman people. So this tribe is having a history of more than 600 to 700 years. And their tradition tells that they have a king, correct? So this king on a regular basis has to come to a public trial. So it's a 600-old ritual, and this ritual is called Gowon ritual. So in this ritual, if you see, the whole tribal community gathers in a particular place, and some people who are given the right to ask questions to the king, they can act as a mediator between the public and the king here. So king needs to answer questions that is thrown to him directly from the public. And if public is happy with the rule of the king, they would continue the rule for some more years. If not, they would ask the king to step down, which would immediately happen. So this ritual was basically started to promote dialogue, harmony and peace between the community and the king. And I think in 2022, this whole ritual has got UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage tag as well. So this practice today in the present time has been so true to the idea that leaders need to be accountable to their public to make sure democracy functions. So accountability, transparency, the social contract theory that we talk about, it was all existing in our tribal population. Somehow over a period of time, we have given new dimensions to the idea of democracy. So this could be a very good example to start your answers with if you get any questions on democracy as a concept, or how accountability is important for a leader in your GS paper 4 ethics questions as well. At the same time, this ritual that is quite popular among the whole world tourists now has garnered so much attention that people from UK, France and USA have traveled to Cameroon to witness this ritual. So where this would be relevant, if you think of, even India is a house to such a beautiful tribal culture which has unique own tribal practices. So if we put it on the tourist map of the country under the concept of niche tourism, definitely India's tribal culture can not only be preserved, it can also be respected, and it can also continue for ages together. So these important values that tribal culture has taught us, it stays with us for many years to come. So with this, we'll end today's ICANN episode. Stay with us for many such informative content in the coming weeks. Thank you so much.